So AEW Dynasty left me confused and excited, just like the first time when we have sex. There's some things that happen that excite us, and there's some things that leave our heads scratching. So I want to start by talking about the main event of the show, and what I want to say was that it was definitely another clusterfuck, but it wasn't as bad as Revolution. So what happened was that it was Swerve versus Moxley, and they had a lot of great offense, a lot of great back and forward, but they did that, the obligatory breaking the 10 count, or in a match where the referee is watching, there's a bunch of hardcore spots. The fact that they get on a ladder and they suplex, and then Swerve does a big pressure to Moxley into a table, it's not good, because even though it's thrilling and exciting, it breaks all logic, because a referee is supposed to be like, hey, this is a wrestling match, you cannot do these things. So that was the first issue that I had, and AEW has a very bad habit of that, because it just means anybody can do whatever they want whenever a referee allows them to permit. The next thing that I did not like was that there was minimal interference in this, but they actually had Hangman Adam Page come out, but he was attacked by the Death Riders, so he decides to help Swerve. So I'm happy to see that storyline kind of wrap up, because I didn't want to see Adam Page cost Swerve, because then it's like, okay, we're on repeat mode. It's going to be like Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher. Like, how many matches, how many repeat of the same story do we get? And then what happens is the Ops, which is Samoa Joe, Hook, and Shibata, come out and they stop the Death Riders. Why are they helping out Swerve Strickland? That doesn't make any sense. And then the Young Bucks come out and they help out John Moxley, and then John Moxley's angry and throws a chair, really. So I'm not sure. I know why they're doing this. They're doing this because they need to have a Anarchy in the Arena match, a 5-on-5. But that's just, but they have like a huge clusterfuck, that they're doing. So it's probably going to be Swerve and Hangman and the Ops versus the Death Riders. And that it's going to be a combination of the Young Bucks, because the Young Bucks have a lot of experience in the Anarchy in the Arena match. So that's why I think they did that. But I also think that we're at a point with Moxley that they say the ratings are going up, and they say that, a combination between HBO Max and the streaming services and the television viewership, they get over 1 million. So it may be motivation or Tony to be like, hey, you know what, there's a couple of heels going into AEW All In. So Moxley would be a good heel, and also another good heel is Mercedes Moné. So I think that's why they want to keep it that way. And I also think that ultimately they have to set up two matches. They have to set up the Blood and Guts match, which usually happens every June. But more importantly, they have to set up Anarchy in the Arena. So they're trying to get, they're trying to get multiple people in that. But I did feel it was a little bit of a clusterfuck. So that's how I feel about the main event. It's not as bad as Revolution, really. I feel like, obviously, the Young Bucks would do something like that because they're egotistical. Swerve and Moxley are violent people, so honestly, the stuff that they're doing is realistic to their characters. Adam Page just being vindictive, but, just now realizing that Swerve takes accountability for his actions. That he hurt him enough for him to understand that he crossed the line with Hangman. So everybody was acting within character, and I really think that that's the thing that I respect. But when you have Samoa Joe and the Ops come out, that's really out of the blue. But I can honestly give that a pass, because they're not such a major part of AEW. I'm not sure if the Death Riders hurt Hook. I believe they did in the beginning, and I also believe they targeted Taz at one point, his dad. So, there could be something to that, or they want, or they're just vigilantes, and they're kind of like, hey, you know what, we don't have respect for the Death Riders because you know what, they cheat to win, and and that's not what Samoa Joe was about. Because Samoa Joe, when he became champion, his philosophy was that he doesn't like the talkers and the naysayers, and he wants people who put up a fight, really. And what has Moxley been, really? Moxley's been a hypocrite. Moxley's been somebody who talks on the microphone. Moxley's kind of been cheating a lot. He's not really... He's a punk bitch, really. So maybe Samoa Joe's like, hey, you know what? I don't appreciate what you're doing, and this needs to stop, really. You don't deserve where you need to be. So there could be some sense made out of it, So overall, I think like the main event was kind of like a bit of a clusterfuck, but it wasn't as bad as what happened in AEW Revolution, where Christian acted out of character, really. So I think for the main event, it was kind of like, it was 50-50 for me. I think if I was to go Larry Gray, it was more like a C- because of, feeling a little confused. And I would also say, too, that I'm just a little confused about the ops. And honestly, why do they keep breaking, DQ rules and 10-count rules? So I want to review a little bit more of the match card. So I arrived a little late to Lake Curtis Center. Usually I come around 7. But they had a lot of matches tonight, and, when you watch 12 or 13 matches, it's good to come at 8 p.m., miss the 0-hour matches. Otherwise, it feels a little too long. So, one thing I want to talk about is Anthony Bowens versus Max Caster. I was very disappointed. I didn't see this match, but the fact that Max Caster lost in 40 seconds is terrible. Like, they completely buried Max Caster, and I wish he was on a winning streak or he was on a time draw streak until he faced Anthony Bowens, and that could have been like a big match, and you could have had Hangman versus Anthony Bowens or something like that in the Owen Hart tournament, because I really think that Hangman has a lot of I really think that Bowens has a lot of potential, but he receives bad booking, and Max Caster does have a lot of potential. I think Max Caster would be a great Ring of Honor wrestler or a Ring of Honor champion, but the fact that he's been buried a bunch of times hurts, and the fact that they're continuing with burying him and all that stuff and humiliating him and allowing him to embarrass himself is just not good. So, that's definitely a huge letdown for me. The show opens with Ospreay versus Kevin Knight, and they had a really good match. Obviously, who's going to win this match, and I was a little surprised because, usually there's a lot more death-defying stuff, but I'm happy that they didn't really do that much, because the problem is if you do that all the time with Will Ospreay, it doesn't become special if he's always doing the same sequence of moves. So I felt like it wasn't the best we get out of Ospreay, but it was still, good enough, really. And then also the match was 13 minutes. So I was happy with that, because usually Ospreay matches are like, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. So this was a little different for me, but obviously Ospreay wins. This was just an average match to me, I think it was a little lackluster. Like, I expected, the way they kind of hyping Kevin Knight, really, and a lot of people have been talking about him is like he's almost like another AJ Styles or something really epic, and I didn't really get that. I think he's a good wrestler, but I don't think that, he lived up to expectations, So I kind of give this match like a C-. The next match was the Hurt Syndicate versus Big Bill and Brian Keith. There were a lot of spots with Big Bill, just like lifting people, throwing people, it taking 2-on-1 offense to take down Big Bill. So I like that because it made him look strong and a big threat, really. I think Brian Keith got the pin, but it was a really good back and forth. I really liked this match a lot. MJF was there. He helped the Hurt Syndicate win by causing a distraction and hitting Big Bill. And I'm totally okay with that because honestly, seeing because it's too early in the story to see if to have MJF turn and then implode the Hurt Syndicate. There really has to be something with MJF, really. And some people were saying that they thought that MJF was going to hire some new wrestlers, but I'm happy with this thing because I think that Big Bill, Brian Keith, they should go through the Ring of Honor tag team titles, in my opinion. Face Dustin and Sammy at the Supercard of Honor, but I don't think that they're ready for the tag team titles because I think like with Brian Keith, he's a little too new to me, and I also want to see what they can do with or and without Chris Jericho, and actually be like a serious team because I think that with Jericho, he interjects comedy really, so I think that they can be tag team champions once they kind of separate from Jericho. But I think that maybe the Ring of Honor tag team champions, so let's see what they can do with it. But overall, it's a really great match, really great offense, and I give it like a B. The next match was Mercedes versus Julia Hart. It's the typical Mercedes Moné match. Like it goes on for a long time, and then towards the end of the match, you kind of get a lot of hype for the opponent of Mercedes Moné because that opponent like does a lot of work, and they put in a big effort to take out Mercedes, but then Mercedes like prevails really, So it's almost like an opposite of a John Cena match where people are usually, where it usually looks like he's going to lose and then he wins at the very end really, except people are cheering for Cena instead of more people booing for him. Like Mercedes Moné is more booed than cheered, but yeah, and that actually happened with her match with Stephanie Vaquer, the same type of formula, where it's almost like a lot of just, effort by her opponent to take her out, but at the end of the day, she wins. So some people feel a little cheated, like, oh, well, this person's doing all this stuff. They come up as a rookie, they come up as somebody who's taking the beatings, and they're gonna slay the unbeatable Mercedes, but that's just not what's going to happen to her, So it's like what I said, like she's a good villain, but eventually you have to find that right person who's going to put in like the long match and actually take the title off of her, like the same way Dusty did in his feuds with Ric Flair and stuff like that. But I think that getting to Mercedes and Toni Storm is a good idea because you have like the top heel in the women's division versus the top baby face. So I'm all for that. And I also would say a weakness of this is that what would have happened if you actually had, if you decided to say, okay, we're gonna have two men's, two women's, and you had Athena beat, I think it's Harley Cameron. It's Athena and Harley Cameron. So what would happen if you had her squash Harley Cameron, or what if you did a beat? You had Mercedes beat down Harley Cameron for just either losing a match or on Collision, stuff like that, and then Harley Cameron came out injured, one move by Athena, and then you kind of have Athena win on the show, and then you have Athena and Mercedes, and then they say their match is going to be on Supercard of Honor. Like I think that would be better booking, and because Mercedes and Athena is a big money match, really. So I wish they kind of told that story more on this show. But in my fantasy booking pitches that I'm giving you guys, I think that's what they should have done, and then say, hey, we're going to have it at Supercard of Honor to show that Ring of Honor shows matter, really. So I wish they kind of did that. But overall, like I said, like the match was definitely a B to me. The next match of that was the Death Riders versus Rated FDR. It was a good offense match. I was very happy that Wheeler Yuta got the pinfall because a lot of people were chanting like "fuck Yuta" and other things like that about him. So he is getting a lot of attention as a villain. So you got to kind of capitalize on this. But it was a regular, type of Death Riders match. Just a lot of interference, a lot of submissions, a lot of like, okay, someone's getting the upper hand, and then they win at the end. And then after that, the FTR attacks Adam Copeland. And it was kind of funny because the crowd was kind of like, cheering for Adam Copeland that he got injured because they feel like, he's kind of pulling a TNA wrestling thing where a veteran from WWE who was a little too old is trying to be the champion. So it was funny to see the crowd kind of turn on Adam Copeland. But I think the other thing is, what story do they tell with this? Where are we going to go with Adam Copeland? And a lot of people are thinking, it's going to be Adam and Christian become a tag team. And then one day what's going to happen is they're going to challenge for the tag team titles. A lot of people are not looking forward to that because they're like, oh man, we don't need the member berries. We don't need this nostalgia stuff, It's done. It's dead. It doesn't need to be resurrected, really, So, and then it kind of feels a little forced. But yeah, then it's also like, what's the long-term booking plan for Rated FTR they're feuding with Adam Copeland. Like, like after him, or if they win or lose with Adam Copeland, where do they go after this? So I'm definitely kind of like hoping that they go in a good direction, because FTR has done a lot for AEW, and they need to be booked strongly, really. And if not, then they just need to talk to Hunter and go back to WWE. But in general, the match was all right. I like the post-match stuff, because even though it was predictable, like, it was definitely something where they just needed to, get to it and create the next like chapter in their story. So it was like a B match. The next match was Toni Storm versus Megan Bayne. Like, unfortunately, I upload footage of AEW shows, so I really missed out on a lot of parts of this match. So I don't want to even give it a grade. But a lot of people are happy that Toni Storm won. Even though I'm not a fan of the Toni Storm gimmick, because I feel like it needs to die at a certain point. They can go on a little too long. If it's been working, it's been working. But overall, it was definitely like a 50-50 match between both people. Like, anybody could win at any time, So it's Kyle Fletcher versus Briscoe. It's good back and forth. They're both hard hitting wrestlers, and Kyle understands his opponent, so he's hard hitting with Mark Briscoe, and there are a lot of things like power bombs onto the barricades and double foot stomps, and just a lot of just like melee throughout it. So and I also liked this 2 minute, but I'm also not a fan of the top rope brainbuster that Kyle Fletcher does, because that looks really dangerous. That people are being dropped in the top rope brainbuster. They do like a spin, and it looks like they're losing their balance really. Like, somebody can get really hurt, but visually it looks like a very just messed up move really. But it was a good match. And then also Kyle Fletcher deserved to be on the card, because we need to tell a story with Kyle Fletcher, and I really think you need to say, hey, he's done a great job with Ospreay, so you can't make him be irrelevant. And in my opinion, this was like one of the best matches on the card. I give it a B+. And then the next match is Bandito versus Jericho. In my opinion, this was the match of the night, because I really liked the storytelling in this. And as I said, like, every match doesn't need storytelling. Sometimes you need to have, like a melee and chaos and balls to the wall action really. But this one had a story of Bandito avenging his sister in his honor, and in his own honor of Mask. And then Jericho cheats, and then it looks like Jericho's going to win, but then Bandito gets the upper edge when the match restarted and all that. So it was good, and then Bandito really had to put in a lot of work really. So the match lasted, I think, roughly around 20 minutes really, but Bandito really had to take a beating. In my opinion, I don't think he's the right person to be the AEW Ring of Honor champion, but I would have kept it on Jericho and given it to Hobbs. But then again, you've kind of invested like 90 days or more into Bandito. He kind of did a big video package of coming back to AEW really. So I think that it's one of those things too that I respect that Bandito is the least built, so it doesn't come out of nowhere really. But overall, the match was good, and I'm very happy to have seen it. So I'm automatically, so I'm gonna give it like a B plus really, because it was just something that was good. And I also appreciate Bandito getting like the title, because Jericho just can't hog it for a long time really. But I really think that one of the reasons why he dropped the title is because he was going to get it back really. So maybe he's trying to be close to Ric Flair in title ratings, because the next one's going to be like 11, then 12, and 13, 14, 15, 16, and so on really. So I think that's kind of the agenda, is that he eventually wants to use it to get more and more title reigns, so he can get close to Ric Flair or tie his record of 16, because we all know Cena's going to beat that. So the next match was Adam Cole versus Daniel Garcia. At this point, I was getting a little tired and I was losing some focus, but it was a good match. It was not good to see Adam Cole limp at the end, because it's almost like, hey, is he just winning just to give up the title? in a few months or right away because they're getting injured, and that's not good. But also, Danny Garcia did a good job. The right person won without Cole because, well, as a lot of people say, you gotta give him a championship reign, see what he can do for a couple of months. To say, hey, maybe we can push you to a heavyweight, or no, you're just a mid carder, because if he's too injury prone, he can't like last really. And also too, like Adam Cole, like he needs to rebuild the TV title. So they had like a decent match, um, and then also I just yeah, they had a really decent match, and I'm happy that Adam Cole won the title, and they did like two title switches. And then the last one is Kenny Omega, Hong Kong Fooey, and Ricochet. They had a really great match, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt like at that point it was just way too goddamn long, and you also know that Kenny Omega was going to win. So overall with AEW Dynasty, it was a really good show. I also appreciate the structure of the show. I liked how they did not have a hardcore match, even though the main event had some hardcore spots. So I appreciate that because it shows that AEW doesn't overly rely on hardcore stipulations. And then also too, like you had like at Revolution, I think you had like three matches that were like either a three-way and two hardcore matches, a steel cage match and like a street fight thing. And then also in May you're gonna have Anarchy in the Arena, so it was good to have a show with no like hardcore stuff, so people have to wait until the next pay-per-view to get that. So that was good booking. I also felt the matches were different. All the matches were different lengths, so it didn't feel too monotonous. And even though you've had matches with Ospreay, who usually goes long, his match wasn't that long, and I appreciate that because monotony has also been an issue with AEW. So overall with Dynasty, it made a bunch of more improvements than Revolution. I know I gave Revolution maybe like a B, like a C minus, a C plus or whatever. Really, I would give Revolution a C minus, but I would give like Dynasty. I think, in my opinion, I would give it a B minus. I think the strength of the show was they showed that they can make a pay-per-view without a hardcore match. They also just had a better structure, a better flow. You featured a lot of new stars like Kevin Hart, Bandito, Speedball, Mike Bailey, and that's good because not a lot of them has had time. But you're trying to be new. You're trying to like work with new people, even with Megan Bang. I also appreciate there wasn't a lot of repeat. I don't think there was any repeat matches, or when I mean like a repeat match, like Swerve and Moxley face each other, but nobody really remembers that because not only they did something historic. Like if you did something like Hangman and Swerve, then people say it's a repeat match because like most people would remember their previous encounters and stories. But I'm happy they didn't have any like thing that felt like a repeat match to me, and they just ultimately did a good job. But the weaknesses was like the main event, and also just not knowing what the ops is about, and also too I think like for goodwill on AEW they should have just made Swerve the champion, but they decided not to do that. So definitely it's a show with like a bunch of ups and downs, but I think the fairest grade to give it is a bit of a C minus, saying that like is a B minus. Saying like there's definitely a lot of areas to improve, but it's not failing. But I definitely appreciate AEW Dynasty. I'm happy that I went. It was well worth it, and I had a bunch of fun. So it's worth the $700 I paid between Airbnb, travel expenses, and also just the price of the ticket. So, rightfully so, it's well deserved to B minus.